Thanks for coming along. I realise there's other tracks you could have chosen, but you've chosen to be here, so for that, I thank you. This is a bit of a tech agnostic session. What I really want to do is present stuff that applies to whatever language you're dealing with, whether it's C#, Python, or whatever else there is out there, I'm not too sure. We often treat code as a set of instructions for the computer, but that's a bit of a fallacy in itself. Code is really for the humans, for the other developers that have to read it. Because beyond code, it gets turned into stuff that only the computer cares about, and we're no longer reading at that point. So it is a subjective talk. I've put that in bold because unlike other talks I've done on a particular tech, I can say this is the right way to do it, this is the wrong way to do it for these reasons. This talk today is actually based on experience, on things I've read or worked on or seen. Feel free to disagree, feel free to absorb bits that might be relevant to you, reject some that aren't, that's perfectly cool. And I'm more than happy to continue this discussion later on through the rest of the day if you find me in the event hall. And the basic gist of it is we can improve code readability, we can make it more empathetic to our fellow developers, and that naming and structure carries a lot more benefits than trying to be clever in writing our code. And we'll see a few examples of that. A little bit about me. Some of you I've worked with before or met through the Melbourne Developer Network, but basically I've been a developer for the last quarter of a century, as my kids like to point out repeatedly. I've had a mix of contracting, consulting, government work, military, startups, and through a combination of good luck and work and family connections, I've also been able to work overseas for quite a few years. So the point of all that isn't to say how awesome I am, but it's just to explain that I have seen a lot of code bases in a lot of different organizations. I've often been in a new role, in a new set, played the role of the new person on the team and have experience in being put into a brand new code base quite a few times. And a lot of the learnings from that is what's the crux of this talk today. I'm not big on Twitter or X or whatever, but feel free to hit me up by email or LinkedIn and get in touch. Let me know what you think of the talk. Real quick agenda, we're going to talk about where code lives. Sounds weird, but we'll get into that. The meat of the talk will be the tips and tricks and tools that we can use to help our code readability. Followed up with some recommended reading if you want to learn more, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Obviously, if we go over time, we'll cut it short and, as I said, hit me up out on the hall. Code is read more often than it is written. I've heard this so many times I don't even know who to quote it to, so it's just a quote. But think about your last day at work as a coder. Did you sit down with a blank editor, start typing furiously for 8 hours and end up with 500 lines of perfectly crafted code that just worked the first time and sent it off to the customer? Probably not. I'd wager you probably had to read 500 lines of code. You probably changed 8 lines, deleted another 12 and called it a day, and maybe that was a good day. Maybe you removed some bugs and improved performance. That's, in my experience, the typical day of a developer. We spend so much more time reading the code, trying to make sense of it. Perhaps we wrote it 6 months ago and completely forgot why we did something the way we did. Or perhaps we're part of a larger team where we can hassle the guy next to us. Why is this the way it is? Or perhaps we're doing open source work where we have no idea really who contributed this and they're no longer available. So the real point of this is think of your code from the point of view of a reader, not necessarily the writer. Can I get a show of hands? Who's started a new role in the last 12 months? Yep, quite a few. Any consultants here? Okay. So all of you probably, have a relatively fresh experience of being put into a brand new team with a brand new code base. Where do I start? Where do I need to look? How do I find this? Now, I think it's a measure of the code quality and structure and readability, a metric of how quickly can a brand new hire get productive. Can they find what they need quickly, or are they spending the first 2 weeks hassling the senior dev to find out where something is, or how do I do this? And if you think of the point of view of having contractors and consultants on the team, you can put a dollar figure on that, right? If you can speed up the amount of time they need to get productive, that's a win for your bottom line. So one takeaway here is the code that we write is going to live a lot longer than we think. Once we've left that organisation, if we're consulting or whatnot, that code is still going to be sitting in that code base and read by a lot more people in the future. Okay, so we're all devs, we're clever people, we have a great idea in mind. What's the steps to get that idea out of our brain and in front of the customer delivering value? It looks something like this. Thank you, AI image generation. This is the path that code takes. High-level language with our cup of coffee and a laptop. Unless you're really working in assembler, that's probably where the bulk of your career is going to lie, right? This is where we worry about things like variable names and tabs or spaces and using comments and all of that kind of thing. And the point of that is because it's for readability with our other devs. Beyond that, all that stuff goes away. It gets turned into assembly code, obviously depending on the tech stack we're talking about, but you get the idea. And then further down, it just ends up as a whole bunch of ones and zeros. And at that point, any semblance to anything readable has long gone. So the point is, for all of this fancy discussions and design patterns and that really just does live at that top level where you and I all work for the bulk of our careers. As someone explained it to me, or gave a very classy analogy, it's like eating at McDonald's or eating at fine dining. It all kinds of ends up the same at the same pipes. So take from that what you will. So to drill home the point, code is for us, not the computers. There's a concept I just want to bring in at this point, cognitive load. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it or what it is, but it's a necessary part of our job. It's the mental effort, it's the working memory that we have to keep in our heads when we're solving a problem, processing information, reading a book, watching Inception. The cognitive load on that movie was very high, having to keep all these things in mind as we do our task. Now, as I said, we can't avoid that as developers. We're trying to solve technical problems, but we can lower it as much as possible so that the things we're spending our precious brain cycles on aren't spent on trivial things that could be easily solved and removed. The dictionary definition, the amount of mental effort being used in a working memory, completing task, processing information. Okay, so that's going to come up a bit in the talk, and I want to just, hopefully that's all clear what that actually represents. The lower we can keep that, the better our code will be and our developer experience. The talk is called Code is a Conversation. Conversations between two or more people, okay? We have different kinds. We have the conversations where things flow. We can follow the chat very easily. We know the topic well. Other conversations, we have to say, sorry, come again, explain that. It can be quite painful and jarring. So I want to introduce a concept, not a concept, a book. The Da Vinci Code. Who's read that? Half the room, okay. Very, very readable book, right? You can just pick it up, you can start. You don't need a lot of existing knowledge. There's nothing really too heavy in it. It's just a great case of airport fiction page turning that you can probably finish in 1 or 2 sittings. Looking up some random Goodreads reviews, the sentences were very short. Okay. Now, books like this, okay, maybe they're not changing the world or that heavy, but they're good, they're entertaining, they're enjoyable to read. Think of the other side of the coin. A book that you just really have to motivate yourself to get through because it's heavy, the cognitive load, there's that term again, is really huge. And a conversation with this book would be terribly painful, and I'm not just talking about the robot voice. Has anyone started this? Put your hand up if you have finished it. Oh, wow, I'm impressed. Yeah, I've tried a few times on that one, and it's a book well worth reading, and I'm glad it was written, but I just admit defeat. That just went beyond me. Okay, so as a conversation, this one would be a lot more challenging to get through. Even the book reviews, I can't read in one pass and make sense of it. I have some idea that he's talking about mathematics. See, about that point, I've sort of lost, and I kind of need to go back and get through it. But think about the code you're writing. Which of these does it represent? Okay. So we've spoken about code being just at that top level where it's only really us humans that it matters for and our readability, and we've discussed cognitive load, and we've discussed that we want to make something that's the equivalent of a Da Vinci page turner. Sentences are very short, you can just read it in one go and not have to back up and explain anything. So there are a few areas where we can do this with our code to make our conversations with other devs via code a bit more readable and easy. In descending order of importance, I've got naming, structure, comments, and commits. Just take a moment to look at this. If you opened up, say, a customer class and see if your cognitive load is okay. Could you get through this in one pass, or do you have a lot of questions? So a lot of the code examples I'm going to show aren't necessarily verbatim from stuff I've worked in, but the examples they present of the problems that existed are real. Now, in this case, I've seen code bases where we have, okay, we'll go through this, an ID with integer, fine. The next three, however, ring a lot of bells. We have name, we have full name, we have surname. Okay, well, is full name a concatenation of name and surname? Do middle names exist in this model? If full name is those two, why can't we just have, a method that concatenates it? Because we have the possibility now of conflicts if surname were to change but full name. All these questions, right? And I'm sure you guys have seen a lot more of those just reading this code. The active date time. Well, that's not really named too clear. What is it? Is it the date that the customer became active in the system? Is it the date they last accessed the system? Is it the date they are active until, if they have a subscription, etc.? All of those are valid data points to hold, but the naming leaves a lot to be desired. And as a newbie reading that, I have to hassle the senior dev next to me to say, excuse me, which one is this? Or I have to dig in and, it slows down my flow. The integer status, why an int? What does 1 mean? What does 21 mean? The good old negative Boolean. Boolean has not registered. Who's seen these in the wild? A few, yeah, this is terrible, okay? This is grounds for dismissal. So if they've registered, they are false. If they haven't, it's a cognitive load, right? That's Stephen Hawking's brief history of time kind of thinking there, to get your head around it. You really want your code to be read in one pass, get it right the first time with good, clear naming, zero ambiguity, right? This is what I'm getting at. The final one, Boolean, is active. I've got no problem at all whatsoever with that. However, we do have a few lines up the active date. What's the relationship between those two? Can one negate the other? Is there ambiguity? So many questions. The naming, I have seen crimes like this and many others in the wild. Now, get customer by ID does what it says. It returns a customer, it receives an ID. I have no problem with that. It suggests that you can also get a customer by string or by social security number or any number of other ones, which is fine, but we have this second line, get customer int ID. How does one relate to the other? Why do we need two? The get customer info now receives a string of customer. What's going on there? This would be the same code base as the lines above it. Which one do you use? Now again, thinking as a brand new person in the team, these are things that slow down your speed and your flow, and you're going to hassle other devs to get guidance on. In the particular case here, customer info, there was a convention in the dev team, in the organization, that if the info was part of the class name, it represented an earlier customer's data set where there'd been a merger. One company bought another company, and when you needed to look at the old company data, it was info. Very obvious. They used a string for their IDs. Again, that's not bad code to have, but the naming is terrible. We could have done a much better job with that. Fetch customer, read customer, aren't they kind of the same thing? Well, another convention that they'd brought in was that it was a secure system. Any reading of customers' data had to be logged, that user A saw customer B's data. But if you just wanted to read it without leaving a log, you would use the read method. Again, yeah. These are things that exist in the wild, and perhaps that when late you could argue there's no need for that. That violates a whole lot of security principles, but if that's what you need, at least name it appropriately so brand new devs can just roll with it and it's obvious. Finally, two different methods that get customers, get all customers. The convention here again was that get customers only brings you the active ones. Get all will give you those that are inactive as well as those that had been soft deleted. Again, cognitive load. Nothing wrong with that code, but we can name it better, yeah? Excuse me. So this is a fairly accepted standard. Now these examples are C#, but they should apply nicely to the other languages that you might be working with, but keeping it consistent with our verbs and nouns and our namings. In this example, again, our simple customer, we have a date of birth, and we have an age. They're the nouns that we might be throwing around. Calculate as a verb. I do like this one. As opposed to get and fetch and read and select, they all suggest database involvement, whereas a calculate, it's nice and clear. Without going into it, I can assume that there's just purely mathematical operations happening, and it should be nice and idempotent. Every time I ask it, I get that back. Obviously, a year from now, that age should be different, but the idea is that if it says calculate, I don't need to worry about any data connection. And the tip for the day, with your naming, pick one and stick with it. I don't really care if it's select, fetch, read, get, but just pick one and use it everywhere. If you get a big class of helpers, methods, or a service class, you've got your fetches, your gets, your selects all over the shop. Which one do I use? The new dev has to wander over to talk to the senior dev to get clarity, and that slows everyone's day down. Similar thing with the nouns. Currently I'm working at a sports analytics organisation, and the naming of just a simple sport event, you wouldn't believe the conversations that come up. Is it a game? Is it a match? Is it a series? Is it a, I'll leave that to some others to debate, but the point is just whichever one you pick, try and be consistent with it and avoid mixing your abbreviations. If you want to call it cust, okay, but use it everywhere. If you do go for the full customer, I personally don't have a problem with using the shorter cust inside a function where it's just referencing like an iterator or something. But consistent verbs, consistent nouns, and you should be able to go exactly where you need for finding the method you're after. SQL doesn't get enough love these days, but I'm going to bring it into this talk. And it lets you do stupid things like calling a column date. There's a few others, but this is one that I've seen quite a bit. That code is perfectly fine. It will run, it will return you the date field, but date is also a data type. It's also a parameter in functions that get used, and so it shows up in blue in SQL. Now, for this example, that's fair enough. You might be able to read that and realize it's a column name, but imagine a big wall of text in a big complex query, and those dates are going to jump out appearing to be something else, and the person reading it is going to have problems with it in terms of our cognitive load and not being able to get through it in one pass. They need to dig in and find out what's going on. So one thing worth mentioning too while we're talking databases and naming is it's very, very, very difficult to rename something in a database once it's gone out, especially in prod. With code, we have a bit more flexibility with good IDEs that let us do global renames. Databases are a nightmare. It can be done, but it's orders of magnitude trickier. So if you're ever in a position where you're naming database columns, take the time to get it right, please. Your future devs will thank you. So that's naming out the way. With function size and scope, there's a lot of things that we can improve to make things more readable and more helpful for the devs coming into the code base. So this method process order, it's named well, it's fairly clear what it does. We've got comments that kind of differentiate the 6 different steps that go into processing an order. But I do have a few problems with it. Just reading through it, I sort of need a few passes to get through it. As I go, I see that, okay, applying a discount, line 120, there's a 0.9 value that takes 10% off the price. Okay, so I have to sort of remember that's a thing. Next step down with the database, we're using AppDB context. I've now had to think a little bit about what database technology or ORM, etc., is used there. A bit further down, we've got email configuration and email values. So you can imagine 2 devs working on completely separate tickets, one involved in an email configuration, one involved in database setup, or perhaps another one involved in changing discount rates. They're all cooking in the same pot, right? They're all involved and they're all muddying up each other's work and potentials for merge conflicts, etc. So in the interest of simplification and improving our code conversation readability, we've refactored it to be like this. It's still the exact same number of steps, it's still the same process, but it's a lot more readable. There's only one path through the code. We're not doing loops anymore. We're not doing checks for validation. It's just a simple top to bottom. We've gotten rid of the comments. We don't need those because the methods do what they say. And I've taken the liberty as well of joining the calculate total and the apply discount lines together, 142, 143, just to thematically connect those two, that they're a little bit more related than the other steps. And this obviously improves things like the repeatability. We're not writing email or log functions many places. We've now got one neat method that can be used. This method publishes an asset, okay, great, but I find reading through this sort of code to be a little bit exhausting. I can kind of see that the happy path, it's got to jump through 3 hoops before it gets to that return publisher publish line of code. And that's fine in itself. As I'm reading, I get to that, but it's the other bits below it as well that cause a bit of a slowdown in reading. If the asset isn't valid, I need to sort of cast my eyes down to get to the failed result, etc., etc. And so we're really relying on indentation here, and that can slow down your reading ability. The same thing written this way, where we just simply move our guard clauses to the top, improves readability many times. In fact, I would go one step further and move those 3 lines to another method just simply called validate asset for publish or something similar, and then your code complexity on this is just one straight line through. There's nothing really to think about. Obviously that then opens up that method to be used by other places that might want to validate an asset instead of having it in this horribly nested thing that relies a lot on indentation. The good old comments. Now, comments definitely fall into the thing that is only for us humans, right? They don't get anywhere near the further pipelines. And love them or hate them, they're part of our daily task. And a few tips on them here are explain the why and not the how. So applying our VIP discount, we know from the comment that VIP customers get 10% off. Okay, I probably wouldn't want to hard code that so much, but let's read it for the example that it is. Now, there's a lot of different ways you could code that. What we don't want to do is, in the comments, write something like, we will loop through every customer's order and calculate the total, and then check if they're VIP. We don't need any of that, okay? Let the code do the talking. If you decide that you want to change the code to do a different way to solve 10% off, that's great. It shouldn't disagree with the comment. The comment is just that broad, why we're doing what we're doing, and leave it at that. Now, I think that perhaps my former colleagues can back me up here. I think I'm a relatively easygoing guy that likes to work well with others, but when I see walls and walls and pages of green commented out text, I get triggered, I'll admit. It's my pet hate in a code base. There's no reason to do it. Please, just trust your source control. If it was important, you wouldn't be commenting it out. It's always going to be there to look up later if you want it. It distracts. You might say, well, it's only a comment, it's not going to cause any issues, but it's going to affect the reader's perspective and the workflow that they're going through. Is that commented out for a reason? Was that a better way of doing it? Are we just trying something now in the live code? What's going on? That's just thoughts that don't need to happen. Get it out of there. Don't comment the obvious or redundant. Again, we're just casting our eyes over this as a reader and we're having to think about these steps, but there's really nothing of any importance in these. If I see code like this, I think one of two things. I think the developer is trying to improve their lines of code count in their GitHub commits, or they've been using an AI prompt, things like check if invoice is null, which then Copilot goes off and writes, and they've left the prompt in there. Don't do it, okay? Let's keep comments as clean and minimal as we can, and ideally, if we have named our functions well, we might not even need them. And then finally, if you're writing anything with, say, a public REST API, you're going to have things like Java docs, XML docs. I believe in Python they're called doc strings, but it's basically like a public description of what that method or class is. Keep these accurate and public friendly and consistent. If you're using terms in that to reference something, make sure that it's consistent in all your other comments. Even if internally as devs you might want to refer to them as other things, that's fine. But if a customer sees something that's called different to what they've expected, that's when support calls come in or confusion slows down everyone's day. And finally, the good old commits. They don't get a lot of love either, like SQL, but we've been doing all of these awesome renaming and function scope modifications and refactoring. Let's keep our commit message nice and clear. That's also part of the conversation between developers. What did you change? Is it linked to a particular ticket? If I was reading this in 6 months' time, would I be able to find the thing that I was working on? Don't forget those guys. Okay, so just to recap those elements that we went over, when you're next raising a pull request, pushing into the code base, just think about these things that you've changed. And are there any areas you could improve? Have the names given enough description that someone doesn't need to go into the function to sort of work out what it does? And does it only do that one thing? We're not introducing other behaviors that don't belong. Is the happy path obvious? We're not doing all that silly indenting and nesting just to get to the main bit of the code. And then finally, does it match whatever else is in the code base? My kids tell me that looks like me when I read a book, by the way. So. Okay, so we've covered a few of the tips and tricks and what Joel says is a good idea for improving code readability. There are tools that can help us. I am a .NET developer. I'm giving you a quick sample with some Visual Studio tools, but regardless of what tech you work in, try and keep these things in mind, and I'm sure that there's equivalent tools out there for the other languages and tech stacks. If we can keep the code base at a consistent standard, things like white space, if one developer's using tabs all the time, one's using spaces, every PR between them is going to cause clutter in the pull request and cause cognitive load that reviewers have to sort of think about. Now, you can turn that off, I know, in reviews, but we want to try and enforce coding standards. It's less to think about. If we're all writing it the same way, it'll be a lot easier experience onboarding as a new developer in that team. These things really, really do help. It's not being like, you're not acting like a fascist if you say, I want things done this way. I promise you it does help. Code complexity, I'll touch on this in the demo. We want to keep an eye on that. Are our functions just getting too complex? Are they doing too many things? If we have tools that give us a simple metric on how things are tracking, we can try and bring that number down as we refactor, and just broadly make it easy for the team. There's schools of thought that say, if everyone's writing code to our standards and the way we want, you shouldn't be able to look at code and know which developer wrote it. I'm okay with that. I also think there's, a role for creativity in the job that we do. but certainly keeping things at a certain standard will make life easier for everyone. So I'm just going to switch over to Visual Studio here. This won't be too long. I've just got this class ripe for refactor, and I want to show 3 extensions that I make use of. One is ReSharper. I'm sure any .NET devs here are familiar with it if they're not already using it. But it basically code analysis and refactoring tools. I'm offline, so it's going to complain a bit. But the other one you may not have heard of, CodeMade. It can automatically format your code on save to a particular standard. So devs don't even need to think about this. They just simply save and bang, these things happen without them needing to think about it. Code maintainability is a little plugin extension that will, above every function you write, it will give you a little red flag, green flag that tells you the score of what it is you're writing. And I usually keep the initial score in mind as I'm working on something and try and improve that as I go, and that lets me know where things are at. So what does this look like in the wild? So this function output days in each month for the last 20 years. What a horrible name. We have this maintainability index of 45 sitting above it. Now, it's given a green flag, but I would not agree with that value. We can get up to 100, which is a lot better. This tells me cyclomatic complexity of 22. There are 22 ways this function might execute with branches and paths and things like that. The Halstead volume, I'm not going to go into that. That's going to be another one of those immense mathematical formulas that we don't need, but basically it's got a red flag and it tells me the lower score is better, so I'll take that on board. And then lines of executable code, 26. So thankfully it removes comments. It's only really telling me how many lines are actually worth thinking about. Okay, so that's a handy one to keep. It's nice and easily accessible. Just quickly scrolling through this, we see that, okay, it loops through every year for the last 20 years, and for each year it loops through every month. It then has some horrible white space and inconsistent formatting here. Can everyone read that okay? You prefer dark mode, or it's all good? Yep, cool. Where are we? So it, again, just some horrible code and formatting and white spacing. It's pulling out the month name based on the value. It gets to the end and it prepares a date report, adds it to a collection. Outside of all of that looping, it then loops again, as well as writing a result string. And then for whatever reason at the end, we've got a bit of sanity checking or analytics where we just want to then output days in August. Okay, so yeah, it's a good one. So the big thing that jumps out to me is let's get rid of this month name code. And actually, no, before I do that, I'm just going to do a save and show you what CodeMade will do with all that white space. It's gone and got rid of it. And that's just some little red lines, markers where changes had been made. So without needing to think or whatnot, stuff like that is taken care of. You can do things like get rid of all the usings at the top as well, if that's part of your thing. ReSharper is telling me we have typos in our comments. That's good to know. And as I said, I'm just going to remove this month logic and we'll see what happens to our code complexity count. Extract a method. Month name. Excellent. So, and I save that, and we've now gone up to 48. So there's a little metric that we can keep in our mind as we do this work on shifting our code towards more readable and maintainable work. Our complexity is down to 9, and the maintainability went up to 48. We've got a few less lines of code, and if we look at CodeMade Spade, I'm just going to reload that because this gives you an overview of your class, and these red numbers on the edge are your cyclomatic complexity. They use a slightly different algorithm so the numbers don't match quite with the other one, but the idea is fine. And you can flag them if it's over a certain value, make it red, and that lets you stand out which functions need your love. Okay, that was a very quick, brief tour of some tools that will help you keep things in standard. I've just got links there if anyone wants to get photos of them. Obviously, this is just a Visual Studio specific tool set, but I'm sure whatever code base and tech you work in, you'll find similar. All right. And finally, if all that's not enough, we can enforce this stuff in pipelines. So any code that doesn't meet the standards we've defined aren't allowed to be merged into dev or main. This is a .NET specific pipeline command, but again, I'm sure you'll have your own if you're working in other tech. Recommended reading. A lot of what I've discussed has come out of Clean Code. I'm not sure if anyone's read this. It's Uncle Bob, Rob Martin. He's written a whole series of books. This is his most well-known. Yep, you're right. Has anyone read this? Or yeah, we've got half the room. Cool. Yep. I did meet him at a workshop a few years ago. Unfortunately, he's gone a little bit too much into politics and social media, and he's been a bit polarizing in the dev community. But keeping just within his code, I find his books well worth reading, and I think you'll become a better developer if you can get through those. The Pragmatic Program. Has anyone read this one? Yep, cool. This was suggested to me very, very early in my career. I reread this every other year. I drag it out and go through it again. It's really, really worth your time. You'll should get a lot out of it. I just will say, if you do look it up, make sure you get the 20th anniversary edition. They've updated it because the first one, half the tech is obsolete and no longer a thing. They get into cloud and things that weren't around in the year 2000. Okay, we are at the end of it. If you're wanting a very high-level view, if you can only take away one thing from this whole talk, it would be that third line: think like a reader, not just a writer. And keep in mind, with everything you do, how easy would it be for a new person in your team to get through this code in the first pass? Or are they spending those precious brain cycles on cognitive load that shouldn't be there in the first place? And make your code more Da Vinci. All right. On that note, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will open up the room to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. What do you think of using LLMs for refactoring instead of well-known ReSharper and other extensions?
Using LLMs instead of ReSharper. Look, I'm not against it, but they have to be treated as a tool, and remember that it's your name going into the commit, regardless of whether it came from your brain, ReSharper, or Copilot. And it doesn't really, I don't think it resolves the problem of the next developer that comes along having to read it. But I will say, if you can use it to make sure that your code is kept to a very simple and readable standard, absolutely go for it. I don't think there's a blanket answer to say, no, I never use AI or I use it for everything. I think realistically we're going to always fall in the middle of those extremes. And it's just a matter of choosing the right amount and in the right context.
Thank you for your talk. Just a quick comment. Looking at it from the perspective of the incoming developer as opposed to the looking to the legacy for the future.
Yeah.
And that is the issue with, it's a corollary to cognitive load, and it's about cognitive prejudice or cognitive preconceptions. So it leads to what I'd call an anti-pattern, which is incrementalism, where you basically fall into a trap of building on top of something else when the conceptualization should be different. For example, you misconceptualize what a class is doing and don't realize that it's actually a subclass of a more abstract concept that you need to introduce above. And then you end up with a complex mess because you've misconceptualized what you started with because you've built on top of something else.
Yeah, I have seen that a lot, and I'm probably guilty of that myself. When you're new to a code base, you think that's how it's done, and it's easy, I guess, to keep building on that. Look, yeah, I'm not quite sure a solution other than, you know, trying to be better developers and getting more awareness of where those code smells lie and detecting them. And I think encouraging new developers, regardless of senior, junior, whatnot, getting fresh eyes in your team and a code base, it's a brilliant opportunity because they're going to see things that you, as a baked-in developer that's sat on that code for 5 years, you're not going to see things that they will at first glance. So really make use of that. Encourage, especially the juniors, encourage them to talk up and point things out. We want dumb questions in that scenario, right?
Yeah, I guess your talk focused on code, but it did allude to that step before the onboarding and how do you get started initially? Like, is it a README or a wiki, or is there like a getstarted.sh or that really first step to and how complex is the README or the Word doc?
I think sadly what's really common is new devs get given like a wiki page with very outdated links and install this, and, you know, beyond getting your security in place so you can connect to NuGet packages and whatnot. I think what a really good thing we can do is provide access directly to our existing code base. Here's a test suite that's failing, make it pass. Off they go, and they're having to step through it. Maybe it takes them the first day, but it's going to be very beneficial in that they're going to learn their way around the code base. Hopefully there's a test suite for real with the code. It's not just for newbies on day one. But having that as sort of a progressive exploration of the code base, I've found that to be quite successful in onboarding. If you are going to do wiki and docs, I think just keep it regularly reviewed, and after every new intake, get their feedback. You know, did this actually help you? Did it work? Were there things that were out of date that didn't match up with what the code was showing? Be my advice.
You talk? No.
I'll let you pick the...
Might be able to get 2 more.
2 more? Okay, and then, yeah, please hassle me outside in there then.
Just in your consultancy experience, how do you broach the topic with your client who probably has some senior developers who are quite passionate about crap code, and how do you tell them it's crap and keep your customer happy?
Diplomatically is the one word quick answer, but look, hopefully with what we do there is an element of objectiveness, so we could point out that things run faster a different way. You know, we can A/B this test, and hopefully we can actually get a clearer answer. In less lines of codes, we get better performance, or there's less things to think about. At the end of the day, you have to respect their tenure and their position and perhaps their familiarity with the execs and whatnot. But I think it's in their benefit as well as ours to raise those conversations respectfully. And in my experience as a baked-in senior, when someone's come in with those ideas, I've made a genuine effort to try and take them on board, at least listen to them and make a call. Yep.
Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering, how do you handle misalignment of interests when developers are not interested in having a conversation through the code? For example, some may think that they don't want to have a conversation with themselves because they're the only ones who are going to maintain that code, or some are a high churn for offshored development groups, or even contractors who are just there for a few months and they're not interested in having a conversation. They just want to make the changes and leave.
Yeah, that's something I've seen a lot too. Look, if you remember one of the last slides I had where we could enforce it in pipelines, that came up in the wild for that exact reason. We were just getting so much inconsistent stuff coming in that, you know what, it's not us being mean, this is checking your code. If it doesn't tick that box, it's not going in. I think when you're in a position to award contracts or hire or whatnot, you can explain this is an important part of our development culture and it won't cost you any more time. We can do things like define code standards that will automatically be applied to your code as you write it. And yeah, by the way, we have this gatekeeper on our pipeline that won't let you do it anyway. So yeah, you be a little militant but nice about it.
No, that's a wrap. Could we
Sorry,
give
yep.
Joel a hand? Thanks.